this is Wednesdays 3 to 5 are usually the meetings of our Culture and Mental Health Research Unit at the Jewish General Hospital. And these meetings are meant to be, in general, informal meetings at which students and investigators associated with the unit present their work at whatever state it's at to help each other with the work. So that might mean presenting an idea you have that's not yet fully developed as a project and trying to get some feedback. It might mean working on a protocol or a draft of a paper or interpreting results or practicing a presentation for a more formal setting. And in general, we try to make these highly interactive, really to, that this should be a safe place and a fun place where we can really get vigorously engaged with each other's work and ideas. And the Culture, Mental Health and Research Unit is the sort of umbrella under which various of us who are working in areas related very broadly to social and cultural dimensions of mental health are affiliated at the hospital. There's a few people who are appointed as investigators to the Lady Davis Institute. So those are the core investigator group, but there are lots of students and so on. And since there are few places within the Division of Social and Transcultural Psychiatry at McGill where we regularly get together across the different research institutes and programs, this research unit meeting also serves as a place where we welcome really students from anywhere in the university or particularly in the Department of Psychiatry, but further afield, who are interested in the area of culture and mental health. So we are restarting these meetings. I'll present some of my own work next week. I'll send the details around by tomorrow. I guess I'll work that out with you, Andy, and send you the topic. And then these will generally occur every Wednesday from 3 to 5. And if any of you have work that you'd like to present, I strongly encourage you to do that. It's the best way to benefit from these meetings and in turn for people to get to know you and get to know your work. So let's take so the topic today, I should say, every year for quite a while now, I've been doing a sort of session on writing for publication to share some thoughts and reflections, partly in terms of my own experiences, learning how to write, do scientific writing, and also my experience as an editor, seeing sort of what other people are doing and how that works out over time in the scientific publishing field. So the idea is really to share that with you and for us to share each other's ideas and experiences, because different people will have had different different experiences, different issues, different ideas that they have. What I want to do is share with you some thoughts on writing for publication that's really based on my own hard-earned knowledge, in the sense that I've always wanted to write because of loving books and loving writing and so on, independently of my sort of engagement in science and in mental health and so on. But I also found that perhaps because of that attitude, I was a bit of a perfectionist. I got told just the other day that I'm a perfectionist, so I'm kind of absorbing that at this late date. But and as a result, was never very happy with what I was doing. And it took me a long time to begin to understand what was going on and what I needed to know to do a better job. So I want to talk a fair bit about the process of writing, but I'll also talk about the mechanics of it in terms of the sequence of things and the protocols and some of the technical aspects related to scientific publishing specifically. I work in a lot of different areas. I work in qualitative and quantitative research. I write things that are theoretical essays as well as database papers, so they're different genres. I'm very interested in metaphor and poetics, so I try to find a bit of a space to use a somewhat richer language than we tend to use in scientific writing, where the premium is on clarity rather than on novelty in our language. So there's a kind of trade-off there. So I will speak a little bit to some of those broader issues, which especially come up if you're writing ethnographic research or you're writing other kinds of qualitative research where you want to capture the voice of people or the quality of certain experiences and feel like you need to push beyond some of the more, as I say, drier and more concrete language that is quite sufficient for describing certain kinds of experimental studies and so on. So we'll try to cover a range of things. And then for the last 30 years, I've edited a mixed methods journal, Transcultural Psychiatric Research Review. So I've had a lot of experience seeing other people's work and helping people to sort of develop their work and to polish their work in certain ways. So I have some ideas that come from that experience as well. So this is what I'm going to try to cover in the next while. Why bother writing in the first place? What are the different motivations and how do those relate to how we engage in the process? Some of the common fallacies about writing and writing for publication that maybe people inherit as a result of the fact that most of our writing, those of you who, all of us are trained in an academic environment, most of the writing we do up to the point that we start writing for publication is writing for professors, writing for teachers, trying to fulfill the requirements of a particular course. And as I'm going to try to argue, writing for publication is quite a bit different. It raises the bar quite a bit higher. It's much more of a developmental process than simply doing what's sufficient or adequate for meeting the requirements of a course. So there has to be a sort of shift in your thinking in some ways in how you approach that. And a lot of grief comes from not realizing that and not realizing that the things you see that are published have been through a lot more, for the most part, a lot more development than a term paper that you wrote for school goes through. So it's not fair to compare the two. They really are different kinds of beasts in some ways, different kinds of products. And we're going to try to clarify what that is, what the differences are and what's involved. I'm going to talk then really about the process of writing and focus a lot on that, because that's where, in my own experience, where I had the most difficulty is misunderstanding the process, needing to figure out a way of getting into a better process. And then we'll talk in the last part more straightforwardly about just how to format things, how to, what the sequence is in terms of submitting articles and stuff. I'll say a bit about that. I won't emphasize it too much, but I'll try to do this fairly quickly. We have till 5. I'll try to do all the main stuff in 45 minutes to an hour. So we have a good half hour at the end to sort of come back over things that you wanted to hear about that were not addressed. But even though we're recording this, feel free to intervene at any point. To unmute and speak up. It'll probably be easier than putting it in the chat. It'll be easier for me to see, but either way, put it in the chat and we'll try to weave that into the discussion so that it's maximally useful to all of you. So what's the point of writing? I mean, some of it is simply that we're expected to write in the nature of our jobs and so on, or if you're trying to get a degree, a part of the important step in the whole process is producing a piece of work. But there are many motivations that, and most of us have more than one motivation at the same time. Hopefully, if you're writing something, whether it's for your graduate program or not, it's something that you actually care about, that you're actually interested in, and that you want to say something about it. You want to learn something about it, and you want to convey what you've learned to other people. So that's already a very different kind of goal than simply meeting a criterion to get a degree. It's a communicative goal. It's a goal of trying to connect to other people. I think we also could do research and write it up because we want deeper understanding about something. So maybe there's a limit to our understanding, or something troubles us, or something's terribly intriguing to us, and so on. Sometimes we already think we know what we want to say, that, a lot of what we do, and certainly in the areas of social and cultural psychiatry, there's often a big advocacy component to what we're doing. There's social issues and problems that we're concerned about, and we already suspect part of what we have to say we already know, in the sense that things need to be improved, but how to do that, of course, is a whole other question. Being able to present that in a way that says something new and that reaches people is important. So clarifying to yourself for any given piece of writing what it is you're trying to accomplish with it is quite important. And that will relate to another point we'll talk about in a moment, which is that writing is always for someone. It's partly for yourself, partly to deepen and clarify your own thoughts, but it's often for someone else. It's for your supervisor, it's for the readers of a journal, it's for a stakeholder community out there that you want to bring some information or some tools to, or you want to advocate on behalf of, or so on. And being clear about those goals is quite important because it will affect many aspects of how you write. It will affect what you focus on, what you elaborate, what you don't need to talk about because it's already shared knowledge, and so on. So thinking about that, and it may well be, let's say you're working on the thesis, it may well be that out of that thesis, there's several pieces of writing that come out of it. In the end, one of which is your thesis, another which might be a scientific article, another which might be an article for practitioners. That is more focused on practical aspects of what you've done, or another piece might be a popular piece for a blog or some other medium where you're just trying to share knowledge and encourage interest in other populations. There's no reason not to do multiple things, although you may need to think sometimes about issues of priority and about plagiarism, even auto-plagiarism. If you want to publish your work, it needs to be original, so you have to decide where does it go first and so on. So we'll talk a little bit about that later, but beginning to think about, for any piece of writing, why you're doing it and what all the reasons are, including the real reasons, the sort of very personal reasons, are important to think about, and it's going to affect your process and affect what you do with your writing, where you orient it and so on. And so that relates to the last question. Once you know what you're trying to do with your writing in general, with a specific piece of writing, that also points toward what's the best way to do that? What's the right place to publish this? What's the right style? What's the right level of technical detail and so on, depending upon who you're trying to reach, and that will affect things. So the fallacies I mentioned already, I alluded to this. Writing for publication is not the same as writing a school assignment. When you write for school, you're writing with a time limit. You're writing with a very narrow focus in the sense of a specific task that you're at. And generally, I know when I did it, things go through 1 or 2 drafts at most. You write the thing, you hand it in, you get a mark. If you're like me, you do it at 3 a.m. in a restaurant, while you're having coffee at an inappropriate hour. And sometimes it's a last minute thing. And if you get a good mark, it's good enough and you're done. Generally, for publication, you're really trying to produce something that is going to have a certain longevity that has to reach a different level of refinement. And so I will come to this later, but most of the things that I write go through about 15 drafts. Each of which is many, many hours of work. So it is orders of magnitude more involved than writing something for school. And that's the biggest difference in terms of just the sheer investment of time, but also the iterative process and the need to look at one's own work critically and to polish it and to really refine it in a way that it succeeds in conveying what you want, and it will be accepted as something that merits publication. So we'll come back to all the details of that. Another common and different kind of fallacy is the notion that if you're going to write something, you need to know what you're going to write before you write it. Generally, that's not the case. Just like when we talk to each other, we usually don't know exactly what we're going to say before we say it. It's something that emerges in the context of conversation and emerges in the moment based on all these many influences that are converging on us. Similarly with writing, you may have a rough idea of the kind of thing you want to say or what you want to talk about, but it's in the process of starting to put ideas down that you then interact with your own ideas. Just like in a conversation, you interact with the other person and ideas emerge. So it's actually one interesting reason for writing is to develop your thoughts, to discover what you think, to refine what you think about something. And you can be very surprised in the process, or you can write yourself into a corner and have to think really hard how to get out of that problem that you've now set for yourself. So I think that's quite interesting, and should be quite encouraging, because one of the things it means then is when you write down things at first, that may not be where you're going to end up. That's where you're starting from. That's what occurs to you right now. But as you work with it, it may change. And that's a thinking process. Writing itself is a thinking process. And I think that's very important to understand. And that then relates to this last thing, which is that if you're good, if you really, certain writers that you read that you think are wonderful and you want to be like them, and you write something down and you look at that first sentence, and you realize, oh my gosh, this is nothing like that elegant sentence that that other person wrote. If you're like me, you may have hours and days and weeks and months of writing sentences, crossing them out, crumpling them up, throwing them till you're surrounded by a giant pile of paper, crushed paper balls. And then feel like you're just not up to the task. So it's important to realize again that what you're reading in most cases by other people has been refined many, many times. And the first draft did not look like that. And when I became an editor and I started receiving articles from people, even very well-known people who'd written wonderful things, and seeing what their submission looked like. And I don't recommend this, incidentally. I think you should polish your submissions too. But I started seeing what some people's submissions look like. It was a real awakening to realize that even people who we think are wonderful writers, their first drafts or their second drafts don't necessarily look very much like what we're, the writers that we love and respect and so on. So that's a lesson, very important lesson that, as I say, most of us don't get just in terms of our exposure to things. And I got that lesson really by reading this book, an earlier edition of this book, which is by a sociologist called Howard Becker, who's very famous for his both his interesting work. He wrote a book called Outsiders. He did an ethnography of jazz musicians, and he studied a lot of interesting different things. But he was very known for this very clear and evocative style in describing things, very elegant writer. And he wrote this book really, which summarizes the kind of writing seminar that he created for his own graduate students, partly based exactly on the problem I already mentioned, which is that people had this impression that they're good writers and bad writers. Good writers write beautiful sentences and beautiful paragraphs and papers, and they're done, and the rest of us struggle, and it just doesn't turn out right. And basically to begin to educate people, as he had learned in his own experience, that the process is really quite different. And one of the important things that he introduced that I think is useful for us to know is the notion that there's a difference between generating ideas and exploring ideas and creating the raw material of a finished piece of writing, and the actual the process then of refining it, of editing it and refining it. And those two modes of engaging with writing, that is generating ideas, putting rough sketches of things down or beginning to explore possible ideas, and the refining of it, the sort of self-editing and refining, use such different frames of mind that you need to some degree to separate those two processes. And so what I suffered from for a long time into my late 20s was the editor coming online too soon in the process. So in other words, rather than just saying a few things and seeing what they, what's there, what occurs to me when I start thinking about something, just as you'd have a conversation with someone, let's talk about stigma. Okay, so we're all going to say things that we know and think about stigma, or remember an anecdote or a book we read or something, and we'll just throw the idea out. But if you look at that right away and say, okay, but is that new? Is that clear? Is that all these other things you'd want to say? It gets in the way of just letting a flow of ideas happen. So that's the key insight. I'm going to say some more things about that in a moment. But what that leads to is a set of ideas about how to write and how to make writing easy. And this is a very useful book that talks a lot about the process of writing, and again, debunks a lot of these myths. The key lesson from this book, I should say, process-wise, is if you want to write, if you need to write, you need to understand that, first of all, for most people, writing is not that much fun. Writing can be very difficult. It's not like, oh, natural writers just have fun. You do hear about people who say that, but I think they're the minority. Most people find writing hard work and frustrating at times. And that, as I say, it comes automatically. And so if you know that, okay, it's going to be hard work, it's not always going to be fun, how do I do it? Then that leads to the other key point of this book, which is you need to schedule time to do it. You need to put aside time to do it. And you need to make that a regular time, and you assign that time for writing, and you do it no matter what. So if you decide, every day from 10 to 12, I'm going to sit down at my desk and do some writing, For a long time, I used to take Mondays because I could sort of relax a bit on Sunday. And then before I got into all the chaos of the week, I would say, okay, Monday's my writing day. And I would have a long stretch on that day to do it. There are many different ways to schedule it. But the important point, and this is a bit of sort of cognitive behavioral psychology, is if you have a fixed time and place in your schedule for doing it, gradually it will become, that whole environment and the whole moment will be full of cues that get you into the state of mind where you can begin to do that process. So that's the number one message in his book. If you want to write a lot, just schedule regular time for writing and insist on it and prioritize it. So that already, I mean, it's easier said than done. It already means making a lot of important decisions and pushing back against certain kinds of pressures and expectations and our desire to go for a walk or, do something else that seems like more fun, or and so on. And you know that the whole issue around procrastination has a lot to do with people just avoiding things that make them anxious and that are aversive. So we just say, well, I'll get to that later. It's making me uncomfortable. I look at my to-do list and I freak out. So I have to go play a computer game because my to-do list makes me too anxious. So saying that, no, this time every day is going to be the writing time, and I'm going to sit there and I'm going to try to write. The next step is, if you realize that the writing is not necessarily about knowing what you need to write or what you have to say, but simply writing. The same way, there's a famous book by Joanna Miller called On Not Being Able to Paint, where she talks about the dilemma of facing a blank canvas and thinking like, what am I going to paint? I have no ideas. I'm stuck. We have the equivalent in writing. People talk about writer's block. I just can't write. And it's fundamentally based on a misunderstanding that you have to have something to say, know what you want to say. You really don't need to. You can set yourself a topic. I have to write about stigma. I have to write about psychosis. I have to write about child supervision in low-income countries, and just write anything that comes to mind. And then react to that. And react to that and react to that. And it's like having a conversation with yourself or having a conversation with the person you were reading last night and the paper you're reading. We'll talk more about that in a moment. But you then begin to write to generate ideas. So this is a writing composition teacher, Peter Elbow, who, and these books are useful. And he basically talked about this idea of free writing. And the idea that what gets in the way for most people of writing is getting too much into the editor mode too quickly and judging their own writing rather than just exploring ideas. There's a way of reading for writing that's different than reading simply for pleasure. And part of it is to read in a way in which you're in conversation with the person that you're reading. So when I read papers, I often print them out and I write notes all over them. And I do this to books sometimes too, even though it hurts me to write in books because they're sort of sacred objects. But in reality, if I'm really, especially if I'm very upset with someone says and really disagree with it, then I just have to write a note. I can't stand it. I have to write in a note, oh, not so, ! And then make a few points as to why. And what I'm doing in that process is I'm generating an idea. Right. So I'll write enough at that point that I can go back. And when I finish the paper, I'll sit down at the computer and I'll transcribe my notes and I'll copy passages from the paper that I'm commenting on, being very careful to put quotation marks around the passage and a page number so that there's no chance later on, as sometimes happens, of accidentally plagiarizing something else. So it's a caution to everyone, because it's one of the cardinal sins in writing is to, not attribute things to other people. But that process then of engaging with someone else's writing and either saying, yes, I agree, that's so important, and here's what it means, or here's how it relates to my topic, and writing that out right away, or no, I totally disagree, this author's missing the point, and here's why, here are the 3 things that they've not noticed. Suddenly you've created a chunk of what you want to say. And you can put it in note form, or you can begin to write it in full sentences. It's going to eventually be a building block or a brick that you can use in building the structure that you want to build. So that's one way. And so reading a lot and making copious notes, and notes that go beyond what's in the text to incorporate cross references to other things you've read, your own personal reaction, an anecdote, an example, an illustration, all kinds of things like that are actually going to be the material that you can then build something more extended out of. in the writing process, you'll often reach a point where you say, okay, this is good, but to take this further, I need to know something about that. You know, I'm writing something, I wrote something yesterday, I'm writing a little paragraph on the history of migration, and I thought I'm going to mention the Silk Road. But of course, then it makes me think, okay, I better look up what's the current opinion about the Silk Road, because I have a certain popular, vague idea of this. And so interestingly, and this is the beauty of Google now, but it's also, of course, a giant rabbit hole. But anyway, you can go and you can look and you can discover right away that there's an interesting scholarly debate about how valid is the notion of the Silk Road. Was this an Orientalist idea that overgeneralized and mistook things? How does the Silk Road of 1,000 years ago relate to the current relationship of China to other countries that is being built up? All kinds of interesting questions, some of which are rabbit holes that may be irrelevant to the thing I'm writing about. Like the current Chinese situation is not relevant, but the fact that there were connections between ancient Greece and Tibet because of these things actually is relevant when you're thinking about what do cultures mean and how much interpenetration is there of different cultures in terms of medical knowledge and things like that. So you have to decide with Google, because it's wonderful now. I should say this is a huge transformation in how I write. I mean, I write with Google right next to me, and I'm downloading papers and I'm reading bits of them and I'm deciding what to make of them as I go. That's different than how I would have done it in the past. In the past, I would have gone to the library and browsed the shelves and spent hours photocopying things and taking them home and then reading them and so on. So, but I think you can have a balance of that. So you say, okay, I need to read first some of the key papers to know where does my work going to sit in relation to that. What's the best and most recent stuff, good review article, good other things that I'm interested in. That gives me an orientation. And now what do I need to read in more depth? And you can generate notes, and now you have a way to begin. This is all related, incidentally, to doing a lit review, whether you're writing a grant proposal or you're writing an article or anything. And then as you go, you'll need to return to that at some point and say, oh, there's a new topic that emerged or a facet of this I didn't even think of, and now I'm going to have to go and look at what's going on there. We're, as I say, hugely helped by the fact that we can use these online searches. And if you're attached to like the McGill Library or whatever, you get access to a huge amount of stuff you can have on your desk right away. And you can read it and focus on it. So that's a huge improvement, I would say, in how scholarship works, a big acceleration. The downsides are that things that are easiest to access may not always be the best thing. So just because you can, Wikipedia is always there, but Wikipedia is a very shaky source of information because it's a crowdsourcing process in which those who have the most energy and who are the most crankiest about things get to write the most about them. So you need to be very careful. It's generally not considered an acceptable scholarly source, except to say this is what's out there, but not to take it seriously. But the point is you can use Google Scholar and you can find lots of things. And there's a leveling out. So we'll come to this at the end, but there now are lots of predatory journals. It's easy to get things published by a not very reputable journal at this point, because they're all making money off people, academics, paying to have their articles published and so on. And you need to know something about that to know if there's a finite amount of time, I can only read so many things. What are really the best things to read? What are going to be the highest quality things that have been through the most rigorous peer review and the most, all these filters, so that I have a lot of trust that what I'm reading is very high quality information, very solid scholarship, and it's, what I should probably be engaging with. So those are some other things. We can come back and talk about that more. But the key part I wanted to suggest here is that maybe it's more accurate to say there are three modes involved with writing. There's the gathering of information and reacting to it. So that's what we've just talked about with note keeping and so on. And I'll open up files for notes for a particular paper. Or sometimes I read certain things and I don't need them right now, but I know I'm going to need them. So I save them in a different file under the name of the author and the name of a topic. And again, you can search on your computer and find this stuff. So nothing gets lost. These little bits of work can eventually be brought back together. So that's the sort of information gathering and reacting to the information to develop one's own ideas. Then there's the generating of text, which I've talked about just now a little bit in terms of this free writing, that is to just let yourself express it however you can. Don't worry about whether it's an elegant sentence. You'll polish that later. Just get the idea out in some form. And then we'll come to is this process of saying, okay, fine, so here it is now. Now I have to really polish it to make sure it's clear and it's complete and it says exactly what I want it to say. Okay. Now this, I don't know if you can read this. It says, this is from Peter Elbow, and this is this key point I made. He says, the most important thing to understand is the need for two different mentalities or frames of mind for writing. A fertile, inventive, yay-saying mentality that will help us come up with lots of words and ideas, and a critical, skeptical, nay-saying mentality that will help us critique, cut, and revise what we have. These two mentalities get in each other's way because they push against each other. But if we make separate arenas for them, they can each flourish on their own and even reinforce each other. So this for me is a key processual issue. And as I say, I mention this because it was a major personal, I would say, a source of anguish for me, really, because the naysaying part got in the way of the just generating things. And I should say that those who enjoy writing more are able to create some of that space for the saying yes part, that they can just, explore something, get some ideas out. And in the process, you surprise yourself sometimes. There's a nice phrase. One of the interesting experiences you have, even with polishing writing, is that you can go back and look at your own writing months or years later and not fully recognize it and say, oh, that's a lovely paragraph or a lovely sentence. I wonder who wrote that. That's so nice. And then you discover, gee, I wrote that. Okay, well, that's kind of interesting. So it's what it speaks to in a way is that the process of writing builds on your own cognition, actually takes it to another level. It actually takes it to a level of clarity or a level of richness that probably everyday conversation does not usually have. I mean, if sometimes I've been in situations where people say, don't worry, we want a paper from your talk, but don't worry, we'll record your talk and then we can just transcribe it and you'll tidy it up and it'll be a paper. Well, if you've ever had the chance to see that, it's pretty depressing when you look at how most of us talk. We don't talk in full sentences. We're totally redundant all the time. We're dropping off things and moving off somewhere else, all of which works fine in conversation because we're in a moment of shared context and we're just playing with the things that are around here. So it's not that hard to follow people, even when they're being semi-coherent. But when you look at it in text, it's just awful. It's got so far to go. I've had situations where people literally handed me this long transcript and I thought, this is pretty useless. I'm going to have to start from scratch and write this because it'll take too long to fix this, to turn it into an actual, linear presentation of the ideas as it needs to be in a written text. I generally would say, and this relates to those two different frames of mind, the yes-saying approach doesn't try to cut things at all. Write as much as you want. Don't worry about it. Just let the ideas flow. You may not use it all. You may decide now, I've written 3 paragraphs. I need 1 sentence to make this point. But then again, the nice thing about computers is nothing's lost. And you may go back later and say, now I'm writing something else and there's a good description of it there. Or now I've written my paper, now I want to write a book chapter based on some of the same ideas, but I have more space and I want to elaborate it. So I would save the cutting down usually till a later stage, because once I get into the cutting mode, I'm like, Edward Scissorhands. I'm all scissors and it's too much. So that's back to this sort of 2 frames of mind. What Howard Becker describes and he sort of does a writing seminar with his students is they'll put up, because what he typically did in his life, he said he would, because he's an academic, he would have like summer vacation. So his summer vacation, August, he would write first drafts of things, but in this totally free, like just put ideas down kind of way. And then he would, over the course of several months back in sort of, the academic year, work on polishing and cutting and tightening up and fixing. So what he would do is he would take some of that text, the first draft, as it were, and show that to students and then talk about how are we going to tighten this up, So let's say there are 2 sentences here and they basically say the same thing. So we're going to cut one completely. But he would also go to the level of saying, do we really need all these words? Sometimes people throw in lots of adjectives because they think they're cool, but they actually don't add anything. So he would start saying, is this word really necessary? Is this the right word? So you can literally and should literally get down to that level of granularity. That's when I say it takes 15 drafts and lots of work. It's because we're talking about that. We're talking about all these different levels. We're talking about the overall architecture. We're talking about the, paragraph to paragraph, how do the ideas evolve? And then sentence to sentence, and then literally at the word level. And I mean, you don't have to do them in that order. You can move back and forth, but that's a very close reading process. And you can learn that sometimes in groups. It needs to be a very supportive group. I can say again that it can be very painful to have someone else, start, redlining your own work and whatever. But again, I've interacted with some of you that way. That's what my own writing looks like. Maybe I'll show you an example at some point, just completely covered with track changes and changing things and moving things around. And that happens many times over. In the process, things get more and more clear and richer, and new ideas emerge in the process. You know, when you ask seriously, is this really the right word? You're deepening your own thinking at that point, because you're saying, is that actually the correct word? I've used a certain word because I thought it's a cool word, but does it actually capture what I'm trying to say here? Is there a better word? So that's the level that he talks about. And as I say, it has to happen. It happens from a critical point of view. It happens from being saturated with good writing and clear thinking, but it has to occur in a safe space. And that safe space means your own attitude as well as the attitude of anybody else that you allow into that sort of intimate space of generating your own ideas. Any other questions or comments so far? These are the key, I should say, these are the two key process issues. Having a space and time where you sort of train you tame the restless animal to sort of sit down and just engage with the writing process, and separating this mentality of the yes, exploring, generating, amplifying, and the critical, you know, is this really the right word? And is there a gap in what I've said? Is there redundancy? Is there lack of clarity, and so on? All the things you need to do to sharpen things. Now, I should say that I'm talking about this from a view of good writing. I think most of what I'm saying probably applies to writing in different languages, but there are stylistic differences. There's a book on English style that's called Clear and Simple is the Truth. And if there's an interesting paper by Johan Galtung, a social scientist, actually is responsible for the construct of structural violence, and a lot of work. He developed the field of peace studies. Took part in one of our advanced study institutes some years ago, but he wrote a fascinating paper from the sort of Scandinavian point of view of different intellectual styles. I say Scandinavian because people in, you know, the Nordic countries sort of look down over the rest of the world, and they have access to many different traditions. So many of them speak, you know, English and German and whatever, so they can sort of see these things. And it's a very funny paper because he says, you know, everybody thinks they're operating in the same intellectual frame because most people are publishing in English and science and so on, but actually they're very different mentalities. So he said the British sort of mentality is, the fundamental question is, are there any data that bear on this question? So we want to be very clear. We want to say, what are the data? The American version is, can we operationalize this construct? The German version is, can we trace this back to first principles? A totally different sort of orientation in terms of what makes interesting intellectual work. The Japanese version he has in this paper, he says, is, who was your master? You know, you locate meaning in a lineage of truth. So you have to acknowledge, you know, where does this come from? Who does it come before? And the best and very pertinent to the Quebec context is the Gallic, or the French version is it possible to say this in good French? So the style and the idea that one uses rich and evocative language is really what makes you a scholar could not be more different in some ways than the Saxonic view, which is just say it. If it's true, if it's meaningful, you should be able to say it very simply and very straightforwardly. And again, from a Gallic sort of whatever intellectual style point of view, that leads to simplistic thinking. It means because if things are true, they're probably very nuanced and difficult to say and full of ambiguities, and that's just the way it is. So I'm mentioning this just to say that, and it's interesting because we have people here whose first language is other languages, and they may, depending upon, you know, kind of work they're doing, they may or may not be thinking in that language, or the words that come easiest to hand may be from that language. And it goes beyond, obviously, just language. It goes, their styles of thinking and ways that one frames things that are definitely informed by particular linguistic structures that can lead to new insights, to different ways of thinking that you would not be so easy to get to from another thing. But if you're trying to turn it into English in the end, you have certain challenges. You have this challenge of clarity and simplicity that the assumption is there should be a way to do that somehow. And you have to aim for that. And that might mean taking, for example, in German, it's very common to write extremely long sentences. with all these made up words that are, concatenations of different things. You can't do that in English. So you end up having to break something into 3 sentences and not make too many of these compound words. They have to be broken down again to their pieces. So you could start somewhere, and some of the German compound words introduce ideas that people never thought of before. They really are a rich way of rubbing 2 ideas together and creating something new. But in the end, you're going to have to unpack that if you're presenting it in English. And we could use other examples as well. And part of the point that relates to this is that since we think to a large extent through language, getting clear is not just a stylistic issue, it's also a thinking issue. It's always, have you really thought this through clearly enough that you know exactly what you want to say? And often when I'm working with something or in my own writing, and I'll ask somebody, why did you use that word? And people will sort of realize on reflection, well, I used that word because I thought that was a cool word, or I read that word, heard that word yesterday in something I was reading, but strictly speaking, that's not exactly what I mean. It's not the right word. There's another word, a simpler word, or maybe another technical word that actually captures what I should be saying at this moment rather than that. So that's a kind of honesty with oneself too. Just as an aside, I once was at an interesting workshop with Grace Paley, a wonderful, wonderful short story writer. And someone asked her, how do you know when you're through revising something? Since you could endlessly revise and endlessly change. And she gave a wonderful answer. She said, when you've taken out all the lies. So, this is speaking as an artist and speaking about, ultimate truths, but I think we could use the same thing for ourselves. When we worked on something, we've taken out all the little fudging, all the ignoring that we don't really know what we said. We used a fancy word because we didn't really know exactly what we wanted to say, and we're like throwing something at it, hoping that'll cover it. Or when we really have another agenda that we haven't declared, and that's what the word is pointing toward. So when you've really unpacked all those and made them clear, then you may be done. Okay. Where am I at? I have to find my slides. Sorry, too many different windows here. Oh, here we go. Okay. Oops. Okay, so we actually already talked about this. This was my slide on developing ideas. And this is the slide that emphasizes what we've already talked about, which is the importance of reading. And you can't make an original contribution to a field if you don't know where the state of the field is at. So you have to read, and you have to read in depth, and depending upon how the level that you're at and how you're contributing, you have to read exhaustively. Which also means at some point that you have to focus, because there's just no way that you can read all the things. So you have to define an area enough that you can say, I've read the key papers in this area, I know what the current state of the field is, and I'm confident that what I have to say is a contribution to that now. So that there's a significant amount of work involved in that. But as I say, that reading should be an active process. If you do that in a way that you're actually not just copying quotes, that's the other thing I should say. It's very easy now to copy and paste, right? You could have a PDF and you just copy a paragraph and paste it in your document. If you do that, you're probably not going to remember anything of what you wrote. So we know, again, from educational psychology, that if you actually write it out, if you type the whole thing out, you look at it and you have to type the whole thing out, you have a much better chance of actually remembering what was there, even if it's an exact quote. So I would recommend that rather than just cutting and pasting, because you can fill a huge document with cut and paste and you're no further ahead actually, because actually you haven't really processed it very much. So at least actually copying out, but then even more importantly, reacting to it. So you have some thoughts when you read this. What are they? Make your notes right under it right away. I really like this. I think they put it very well, and it reminds me of so-and-so. And I wonder if this could be applied to such and such. Just have your own think out loud thoughts there. And sometimes it goes beyond that. As I say, often I'll find that I want to say something at that point, and I write something that's almost like a response. And sometimes it's a sentence I can actually use, or sometimes a paragraph I can actually use. I read a book by a psychiatrist philosopher called The Rise and Fall of the Biopsychosocial Approach. And I was extremely irritated by almost everything he wrote. I disagree vehemently with many things. And so I wrote, first of all, I copied the book with notes, and then I wrote pages of notes afterward talking about how wrong he was on so many different points. And I've never written the paper I was going to write where I just sort of ranted on about all the things that are wrong, but I've incorporated many pieces of that in other things. So in other words, I generated ideas by clarifying to my own mind what I thought he was not getting, that have then helped me with other things. So that's why I say sometimes finding things that you agree with is great. You can buttress your argument, but finding things you disagree with is sometimes even better because it generates more energy. It gets you going, and you have, and then you can try to clarify exactly why do you disagree, or exactly what's missing, or exactly, what are you going to add to that. So it's all helpful. And if you can do that more actively, then, as I say, you'll end up with lots of things you can work with later in weaving it together into something that will be the text you want. I think there are different kinds. Another kind of reading I recommend is literary reading. I mean, I highly recommend reading lots of good novels and other things that are just well expressed, even though, as I said, often, in scientific writing, we have to restrain ourselves a bit to be maximally clear. Reading a good prose stylist. One of my mentors was a psychologist called Donald Hebb, who was, again, known for writing really beautifully clearly. And definitely had a kind of literary style to his essays and to his arguments. And I think being able to cultivate that is rewarding, since we all have to read a lot. It's definitely more fun when you read somebody who writes well and obviously is taking some pleasure in expressing things clearly. And the more you're, again, as I mentioned at the beginning, the more you're presenting qualitative research, the more you're trying to capture lived experience and so on, the more you have to find some space for that. To be able to convey that adequately to people. I think that the other thing that's helpful, and we have like the residents, for example, in their training have a journal club where people read an article together and then discuss it. So beyond making your own notes and learning how to do that, I suppose, being able to discuss with other people, deciding if you're interested in the same area, let's read an article together and then let's talk about it, talk about what we got out of it, what we noticed. And depending upon how close it is to your own work, you can go all the way from what's the broad idea that's interesting and what it was relate to, down to a more granular level. How is this presented? What's wrong with the method? How are the results presented? And so on. And this speaks later on, we'll come to this. Scientific writing, database scientific writing, whatever, has a very clear template for it. So that helps you a lot because there's a very clear structure that you're filling in the pieces. And even more, if you have a study or a type of work that's very close to what you're actually doing, even in the journal where you want to publish, there may be a huge amount of information in that paper that essentially you can model your own work on. We're not talking about plagiarizing, we're talking about taking that whole structure and saying, fine, I'm going to use similar structure for my own thing. So that greatly simplifies the whole process. Okay. Presenting your work, and that's what part of what these meetings, these Wednesday afternoon meetings are for, is another way to generate ideas and to find out where there might be a gap in your ideas. Because one of the things that often happens when you write is things make sense to you. You're moving from one idea to the next because they're connected intuitively somehow for you. But someone else will read it and say, I don't understand how you got from this to that. How are they related? And when somebody asks you that, you may have an answer right away. You may say, oh, well, so-and-so and so-and-so. And you realize, okay, but I should have said that. So you have to put that in there. So that's helpful. Sometimes you realize, well, I don't actually know. I mean, I think they're related. I feel as though they should be related, but I haven't really worked it out. And that's then an actual piece of intellectual work that you have to do. You have to figure out how are they related or not. And you have to make that argument. So having other people look at your work, whether it's just an oral presentation or whether it's a piece of text, is one way to help you with that, to notice where the jumps are, where the gaps are, where the things are that you haven't really addressed. Okay, so you're writing and you've got a process now where you're generating text and it's helping you to think through things, and you're having certain little moments of epiphanies where you think, well, that's cool. I like the idea that I got to there is interesting, or I like the way I put that, or this has led me to look up a new thing and I learned something interesting, and all that's happening. So that's good. That's the key part of the work. But now you're also thinking, I want to be producing something that I can publish, because you could write lots of things that are interesting for you, and it doesn't fit anywhere. It doesn't fit with other people. So what are people looking for in journals? Well, first of all, they're looking for high quality work. So that speaks to all the things I've said now about polishing your work. It also means having a good question, having a good methodology, all those other things we're not talking about in this particular discussion. So people are looking for good work. They're looking for work that's up to date and original, which means you've got to know the literature to know whether you actually what you're basing it on. We get articles to the journal sometimes where a person's writing an article and there's no references that are less than 10 or 20 years old. They're all from a long time ago. So then the immediate reaction is this person's not au courant. They sort of don't know where the field's moved. And maybe they're talking about a timeless question, the nature of reality. It's still a problem, but they're not talking about it in a way that speaks to contemporary conversations. It's very likely that they're sort of reinventing the wheel, that they're probably saying things that other people have said, because God knows there are more people out there writing now than there ever were before. That's the other problem we're all up against, is a sort of exponential growth of people writing and chopping down trees and publishing things and so on. So that background reading is very important. And being part of a group and people who are reading and people who alert you to other things and so on is one good way. Being part of a lab group and so on that's working in an area, it's a way to be pretty confident that we're up to date, we know what other groups are doing and so on. One thing you should realize is that the scholarly community out there is people who are interested in the same things may be interested in talking to you or be willing to talk to you. And so for one thing, incidentally, if you can't find things on Google, if they're not easily accessible, you can always write to the author and say, I'd like a copy of your article or your chapter. And 9 times out of 10, they'll send it to you right away. So just be aware. I mean, they may not want to have a long conversation with you. If they're like me, that you have 1,200 emails in their inbox, they may be a little bit stressed out about that. But it's not a big deal for them to send you a PDF of their article. So don't feel that you have no way of getting access to these things. Just reach out to people and ask them, please, if they could send it to you. Nowadays, with ResearchGateNet or with Academia.edu, it's a little bit easier to do that for many people, because you can literally do it through those websites if they haven't already posted it. Okay, the last part here is well written and presented, and this is quite important. I should say that if you send an article to someone, you say, well, it's got good data here. It's true, it's not really very polished yet, but I'll do that later. You're taking a big risk. Because editors, first of all, may just reject it out of hand. They read the abstract and it's already muddled, and they think, well, I'm not going to subject reviewers to this. Or you send it to reviewers, and reviewers say, I can't really figure this out. There's sentences that are just not clear. I don't know what this person's trying to say. And again, you'd probably be kicked out of the process right at that stage. So taking the time to polish this thing so that you're clear and your colleagues are clear that this is well presented and so on is really important. And if English is not your first language and you're not 100% comfortable in it, get someone else, speaking in English publishing now, get someone else who is, to go over it just from that point of view. And I mean, I have my wife look at things, even though this is my first language and I am pretty comfortable in it, because I always make typos, I always miss things and so on. So if that's true of me, it's even more true of somebody who's already operating in a second or third language, that don't handicap yourself when you're going through the peer review process by not having something that's already very clearly presented, and you won't at least have that challenge. Okay, next. This is a big issue. And again, it's one way in which things differ from what happens when you write for yourself and when you write for courses. You pick a topic, you're interested in learning about it, you write something, it's all new to you, it's all very exciting, but it's not relevant to a particular community because they are already somewhere else. Or you have a certain unique mix of things you're interested in, and it's idiosyncratic to you. It's just that just happens to be the things that you're interested in. So the way to think about it is that publishing, scientific publishing, is joining a conversation. Every journal is a community or a set of communities, and within that community, there's certain ongoing conversations, certain topics that are being talked about. When you write, you should be writing for that journal and for that conversation. You'll save yourself a lot of grief. And this is what often happens when people write a thesis and then they try to publish articles based on the thesis. If they don't think at that point, okay, so I'm going to turn this chapter into an article, where does that article belong? Before you do any adapting of that chapter, you need to decide that, because otherwise you can easily write an article that's fine, but it doesn't fit anywhere, because you're making too explicit things that are completely taken for granted in a particular field, and you're not explaining other things that have to be talked about. and you're not grasping what the current, if you want to join a conversation, a bunch of people are standing around talking about something, you stand on the periphery, you listen to the conversation, and when somebody mentions something that you've had a similar experience, or you read something interesting about it, or you have a joke to tell about it, that's when you jump in and you now can contribute. So it's very analogous. You may, if you look at a journal that you'd like to be published in, which is also like saying, this is a community I'd like to join. I like what people publish here. I like the way they think. I like the things they talk about. That's relevant to me. You read some recent articles and you say, oh, that's interesting. My study is a bit like that. It could speak to that question. Or my study challenges that, or then you have an anchor point for how you would begin. And you may or may not refer directly to that. It depends how close it is. You might say in 2020, so-and-so in this journal wrote such and such. However, when you go on from there, more commonly, you're not doing that. You're presenting your work, but in the background, you're definitely relating to other things. And if there are no citations in your article to anything else in that journal, it may not be the best place for you. That's a hint that you may not be really part of the same conversation, because that nothing like what you're doing is appearing there. Now maybe you're really striking out on a whole new thing, and that's great, and you're bringing new stuff to that journal. But even then, there should be things that are related methodologically, or some other angle where you say, this is why this thing that I have to say really would fit well in this journal. It would really make sense for them. So I'm suggesting that because I've seen a lot of people be frustrated where they wrote something fine, and the journals will tell them, this is a good article, it just doesn't fit. It's just not for us. It's too local, or too specific, or too anthropological, or too psychiatric, or too this or too that people, because they've not paid attention to what is the kind of conversation going on there. So, as I say, the quickest clue to that is, what are you reading? What do you want to read? What do you want to join? And the flip side of that is, you might decide, oh, this fits well in this journal, but this is not where I'm going career-wise. This is not who I want to be talking to. So getting an article published in the Journal of Mathematical Biology, if you're not going to be a mathematical biologist, it might be a feather in your cap, like, look how cool I am, I could do this highly technical thing, but it may not be all that helpful to you if you never plan to publish there again or read anything in that journal again in the future. It may really be more of a flashy thing you did than something that really is helping you to become part of a community. Because one of the exciting things that happens with publishing is that people read your work, and people react to your work, and they start citing your work, and they contact you, and they share things, and so on. So you become part of a community in some ways. So I think these are important choices to be made in terms of where you're heading, and what you would like to be with. And it has a lot of important implications. It can also be that you decide, okay, I'm doing a study, and part of what I did was I developed a measure, and I have to publish that measure, or publish the groundwork for that measure somewhere, so that I can refer to that in a later thing. And then you might decide, okay, I need to publish this in a journal that publishes measures, even though that's not the kind of journal I'm going to read all the time, like Psychological Reports or something like that, because I need to have that anchored somewhere. So that's one of the exceptions, or one of the, even though you might not be a psychometrician or something, you might decide, well, it's appropriate to have something there because it's going to help with other work. Okay, a few other things here. I think we're getting through most of the process issues. Where's my slide? So I made this point about journals, and I think the other thing I would say is that, since you may not get your article accepted in that journal, you should aim high, pick a journal that you think is, has a good readership and high standards, editorial standards, and so on. Impact factor is one indication of that, not the only one. And if you have a very specific area you're looking at, you may have a lot of journals that don't have high impact factors, because the ones that have the highest impact factors tend to be broad journals and are like the flagship journal in a field, let's say. But if you're working in a very specific niche, our own journal, Transcultural Psychiatry, is at this sort of intersection of multiple things. So it has a more modest impact factor, given the fact that it's a smaller community who are working at that intersection. And then, okay. So you're choosing the journal. These are some of the things you're taking into account. One of the things you have to consider is open access. Nowadays, that's very appealing in many cases, because it means that the cost for publishing is falling on you rather than on the reader. So what it means is if you publish in most open access journals, you might have to pay $2,500 or $3,000 US to have your article open access. If you don't have a grant or your lab doesn't have a grant to pay for that, that becomes a major obstacle. Because the other way around is if it's not open access, somebody's going to have to pay to read your article. Either their library has already paid and they have free access, which is the case for many journals. Let's say if you're at McGill, and in some low-income countries, it's possible because there are agreements so that people get access, for example, to the Sage journals, to Springer journals, other things. But I should say that it's less of a barrier than it appears these days because of what I said earlier, which is even if you have a closed access journal, you can have a PDF copy of that article and you are free to share that personally with someone. So if someone writes to you and says, could I have a copy of your article? You are generally entitled to send them a copy of that article. And you can send it without formatting for sure. In most cases, you can send it to them with formatting. You have to read the agreement. So anyway, okay. Where are we at? Oh, yeah, so we need to mention this. Most of us now get mail every day. I get regular invitations to write for the Journal of Refrigeration Technology or, of extraterrestrial obstetrics and gynecology, or I mean, just every absurd thing under the sun, multiple times a day to join editorial boards, to write articles, whatever. Special collections, will publish your book, et cetera, et cetera. It's a huge predatory industry in which people are making money because scholars have to publish and scholars have budgets sometimes to help that, and they make money off people paying for the publication. So be very alert to that. Basically, publish in places you're familiar with that are known to be credible, because it won't help your career if you publish in some place that's really dicey. And for one thing, you won't get good feedback. So if a journal just wants to get your money, then they don't want to reject your article. So they're not going to have anybody look at it long and hard and tell you, you know what, this is not ready for prime time, go back and do some more work. You want that. Getting peer review is just like having a good friend. Nobody will take your work as seriously as a good peer reviewer. Who will try to tell you this is what's wrong, this is what needs to be fixed. So that's a very important part of the process of science and of scholarly work. Okay, a couple of more things about the mechanics of writing. I think it's very, very useful to outline. I've talked a bit about just generating chunks by reading, but how does that develop the architecture of a whole article? Well, it's by having an outline. And that outline might start again very simply, like I know I need to, here's where I'm starting and here's where I need to end up and here's what's in between. And then you develop that outline in more detail. And if you develop an outline in enough detail, the writing becomes very simple at that point, because every line in your outline might come down to, well, that's a paragraph actually. Or this is even at a sub level, these are the two things I have to say in this paragraph. And then it becomes very easy because you're just saying, okay, I have to say this now. How do I say this? And if you do that with the non-critical mentality, you've got a very detailed outline, and now you're just turning your points into sentences without worrying for the moment about whether they're beautiful sentences. Before you know it, you'll have a draft of your paper. And then you can start polishing it and saying, is there a better way to say this, and so on. So that's my recommended process, to do it as straightforwardly as possible and not get tied up in knots as you're doing it. And still to have an opportunity in the whole process to begin to refine your thinking. When you're writing, you need to have certain things in mind when you're thinking of this architecture. And these are, I think, key questions. Who are the readers? Who are the readers you expect for this paper? Are there other readers that are not the primary readers, but you would also hope that those people would be able to get to make use of this paper? And then I think a key issue, and this is often when I'm talking to students working on a project and trying to decide, they've got some research now, there are lots of little details, but one of the questions is, what's the main story here? What's the main story you have to tell? And that might be one point that you need to make. It shouldn't be more than 3 points that you need to make. There may be 20 things in your data that you want to comment on, but those can't all be in the foreground. People will get totally lost and they'll miss the main point that you're trying to make. That's actually the interesting story. So identifying that story is helpful, and trying to put that in a succinct way is helpful, because it means you're getting clearer and you're getting a kind of narrative thread that is going to help you attach various things to it as you begin to tell your story. Yeah, okay, let me leave it there for the moment. There are lots of books out there that tell you how to write a scientific paper, which are worth looking at. They're not, they don't necessarily capture these other aspects of the process I've talked about. They're very helpful in terms of the structure, the skeleton. And this is a great tool for most of us in doing this work. The fact that a database scientific paper has a fairly rigid structure. It has these categories. It has a title, which is something to think about, because your title is what's going to grab people's attention and make it clear what's in the article. And you can decide how general, how specific should the title be, so that it will gather people, grab people's attention and convey what you need it to convey. It has an abstract. Some medical journals often have structured abstracts where you have different categories. Some don't, so you need to pay attention to that. That's, again, very important, because that's what people will find when they go looking for your article. The first thing they'll find is your abstract, and they may read that and decide if they're going to read any more. So your abstract should contain key information, including key findings, because that's really what's going to hook people, and that's where your ideas are going to begin to circulate around that. Keywords are important because they can go beyond what's in the abstract and title to let people know what this is about. And then you've got the body of the text, okay? And then you've got this other apparatus, references and tables and figures and so on. So the structure of the text. So this is the usual structure for a quantitative database paper. You have an introduction that's saying, what's this paper about, and why is this important? Then you have background, which sort of says, what do you need to know to follow, what's the state of the literature? Where does this work, fit in? How does this project, what's it based on? Then you have your hypotheses. If it's a qualitative article, you have research questions. You can't really test hypotheses usually with a qualitative article, but you may say, we wanted to know more about the range of methods refugees use for adapting to the waiting period before their status is determined. So we're just exploring that. So that's a research question, if you will. Then you have your methods, where you're setting that out in great detail. What are the materials you're working with? Their setting, sample, instruments and measures. Usually you describe those first, then the procedure, which is like a step-by-step recipe of what you did, which is in enough detail that people could replicate it. Often in biological papers, the details are so complex that they're in supplements online, because there's just endless detail, which only another scientist planning to do the exact same method or really digging into the critique of the method is going to go all the way down to that level in terms of, but it needs to be available for, that's part of the credibility and the process of science. And then you have a strategy for data analysis. If you're using statistics, you have, before you present the statistics, what is the overall structure of the analysis? What kind of recoding? What kind of variables are you using? What are the analytic methods? And if there's anything new, you might need to describe it in detail. If you're using an unfamiliar method, or at least unfamiliar for that journal or that audience, you might need to describe it in more detail. If not, you may need if it's familiar, you may not need to see very much. Then you present the results, and the results, again, in a database paper, are presented concisely. You try not to repeat. If something's in a table, it's best presented in a table, present it in the table, and you just summarize it very briefly in the text. You don't repeat the numbers that are in the table. They're there. Or vice versa. You don't have a table that just has one line or one column or one row. It's not a table. That's just a list. So put that in the text. It doesn't need a table. A table is a matrix, right, in which you have multiple rows, multiple columns, and that's the most succinct way to present things, both in terms of repeating labels, but also in terms of allowing quick comparison across columns or across rows for people. So that's what a table's for. And if you've used that, then you do not need to say all that in the results section. You should not. You should just be highlighting key points that you want to make. Then you have the discussion. And the discussion is where you go over the key things in your results and describe what they are, what they mean. You may introduce some new literature that you did not mention, although it's a big thing. It should have been, at least some of it should have been in your background. But you can introduce some more specific things where you compare your results to other studies and try to draw out what the implications are. And then generally you would have a conclusion where you bring forward the take-home lessons that you want people to walk away with in more detail than you would necessarily have in an abstract. One of the big differences with qualitative research is that often the results and the discussion section are fused into one, because it's very hard to present the results without actually quoting material, and it's very hard to make sense of the quote without beginning to discuss, well, what does this mean? So usually people will end up collapsing those into a long section in which they present that. And that's that, and the sort of use of questions rather than hypotheses are major differences in the way in which things are presented. Okay. Where are we here? So in writing this kind of paper, I think it's usually easier to start by writing the results first, because then you know it's from laying out your results in terms of what are the, if for a qualitative paper, what are the key themes that I want to talk about, what are the key findings. For a quantitative paper, what are the tables, what are the main points in these tables. That then tells you what's the story here, what's the interesting thing about this data, and that then has implications for what areas of the method are you going to give more detail on, what parts of the introduction do you need to introduce certain things to set up why this question is, why the thing you found is so interesting, and so on. So there's a kind of a recursive process. Often the methods you can draw from a grant proposal you already wrote. You already have the methods in some detail. You'll just have to decide which elements are important for this particular paper, because your methods might be larger than the particular study that you're presenting. So usually this is the order I usually find it easier to write. You write the results first, write a discussion, and the methods and data analysis, it doesn't matter. You can plug those in pretty much any time because you already have those often from your grant proposal, but you can decide what level of detail once you know what the main things are you're focusing on, and only then go back and finish writing the background lit review. And actually the introduction and conclusion are like the very last things, because that's now like the capstone, that's the framing, that's the leading the reader into the study and giving the capstone of the study, which depends on all the stuff in between. So you can write it at first if you want, but just accept that you'll probably have to go back and revise it once you find out where did you actually end up once you presented all the actual data and findings and so on that you had. Okay. So you've done this, you've done a draft of this thing. It looks pretty good. Now what do you do? Well, you can give it to other people to read right away, or you can put it away and not look at it yourself for a week or two and then take it out and look at it. And hopefully you'll be able to look at it a little bit with fresh eyes at that point and notice all kinds of things you didn't notice last time, from small typos to jumps and things where, oh my gosh, I just went from here to here. I never said how those two things are related, and so on, and do another draft. And then do another draft. And as I say, my things typically go through 12 to 14 drafts, sometimes more. So that often involves other people in that process at different points. When you're having other people look at it, it's good to have one person look at it who's very much in the same field, who knows the technical details, who knows what a typical article looks like in this area. They'll give you lots of useful feedback. It's also helpful to ask somebody else who's also a scientist, if you will, or a researcher, but who's in a different field, who can read it like an intelligent reader, and they may accept, okay, I don't quite follow all these details, and you can decide, well, if you're in the field, you'd know that, that's not an issue. But other things, it gives you a chance to say, can I make this paper more accessible by being a bit clearer, by giving a bit more detail? So you can sort of decide that. Almost done here. Okay, journal process. Make sure you follow the style of the journal. So you should look at all journals online have details on they're following American Psychological Association or American Board of Medical Publishers or whatever. I forget these different things. So make sure that you're following the style accurately and correctly. Nowadays all submission is electronic online, which is good because you can also track what's going on. You can send a cover letter. There's not much point in making special pleading in the cover letter. Please, please, please publish my paper. It's so wonderful. My career depends on it. Or this is the best thing since sliced bread. We've really discovered, the key to the universe. It's going to be taken with a giant grain of salt. So it's your abstract, your title, and so on that's going to really carry the greatest weight. So I wouldn't belabor that. You could have a sense about why I think it's a good fit with your journal, because there's been a lot of debate recently about so-and-so, and this addresses that question. That might help you get past the first cut. Because nowadays, more and more journals have a first cut where they say, thanks very much, but we've decided not to send this article for review. You send to Social Science and Medicine, 30 or 40% of the articles are cut right away. They never go out for peer review. They're just deluged. All reviewers are deluged, and they just have to sort of set the bar high, and they'll do it on the basis of this looks like a fine article, but it's too specific, too specialized, or it's not in our domain, or as I say, the things you can avoid, like I read a sentence or the title, and it's already got major grammatical errors, so forget it. I'm just not gonna spend more time on it. So, but as I say, the letter might help a little bit with that, but I wouldn't put much weight on it. I don't think people pay too much attention to those things. So after this is all changed now. This is I have to redo the slide. This is in the days of paper trails and snail mail and so on. You should get more or less immediately a lot of this is electronically generated form letters telling you, thank you, your paper's been submitted. Sometimes they'll tell you, we kicked it out again because you're missing such and such, or you did not blind your article. You're not supposed to have your name on the front page or whatever, different requirements for the journal, and they'll kick it out and they'll tell you, send it again. So you'll do that fixing up of whatever was missing. And then it goes into the system. And as I say, nowadays you can usually monitor this. It will go to an editor or associate editor who has to find reviewers, and it'll go be with reviewers, and reviewers will respond. Some journals, like the Frontiers journals and so on, have open peer reviewing. It's not blinded. You can see the reviewers see the authors, and the authors see the reviewers, and you can see that whole process. That's interesting. There are many good things about that. The value of blind peer review is especially for junior scholars and in fields where there are huge conflicts between different factions and whatever, because it's meant to get you out of that whole process. So you don't have to be afraid as an author or as a reviewer to say tough things to somebody, which in any event you should always say politely and kindly, because people have sweated blood to do this thing and they should be treated kindly, even if it's not a great job. Same thing for us, that hopefully you get back from people, even if you get critique, you get it back politely. Now, there are many responses you'll get from reviews. The most common one, why is it in this order? The most common one would be this. Reject is a big one, but anyway. So let's do it in this order, though. So you might be very lucky and you might get a conditional acceptance. This does not happen that often, but people say, we like your article, we're prepared to accept it if you make the following changes. That's wonderful that happens. I should say in my whole career, I've had just a couple of papers that got accepted outright. Very, very rare event. Conditional acceptance, a little more common, but still not that common. So don't expect this, but if you get this, great. It might happen if it's a thematic issue and you already know the people and you're sort of, you've already got a foot in the door. But in any event, they're going to give you some feedback. What this means usually is it's not going to go out for peer review again. It's only the editor who's going to decide. So the feedback you give has to be directed to the editor in a way that the editor can really see that you've done the things you needed to do. The more common thing that you're going to get is revise and resubmit. So we are not prepared to accept your article. However, if you make the following, the revisions, if you respond to all the reviewers, we'll be happy to send it back to them to reconsider. So what do? Let's say you had 3 different reviewers. Some of them wrote pages of notes. We had an article in Behavioral and Brain Sciences. We had, I think, 5 reviewers at one point, and we had pages and pages of notes. It was completely intense. But also extremely exciting, because as I said, you'll never have anybody read your stuff as closely as a serious peer reviewer, actually cares about the field, cares about the subject, knows what needs to be thought about. And people write really impressive things. You really can learn a lot. So you should view that as these are all your friends. They're trying to save you from embarrassment. They're trying to help you hoist this work up to another level. And that's what science is in the end. Actually, science resides not just in the work that we're doing individually, but in this communal process of criticism and norm policing and all this effort to sort of raise things up. That's what makes the scientific method or methods something special in a way. So that's your friend, but you need to take it very seriously. Therefore, you need to look at every single point that each reviewer has made. I would number each one, and maybe there's a paragraph, and maybe there's 5 points in the paragraph that are actually separate points. I would unpack them, number them, and right away, before you go any further, begin to just off the top of your head say, okay, I can fix this. Good point. I'll just add that. Oh, that's a problem. I didn't collect that data. you know what, I don't think I can collect that data. I'll have to make an argument for why it's still interesting, even though I can't fix that part. So you're going to have different responses to different things that you agree with and you're easy to fix, things you agree with but you can't fix. And you have to make the argument that, yes, we agree it's a limitation, but we still think the paper is interesting. And things that you disagree with, things that you think this, first of all, the simplest kind is the author says, oh, you didn't describe ethics review. And you say, oh yeah, there it is on page 3. So you just say, actually it is, it's there on page 3. The reviewer didn't catch that. But sometimes it means it's there, but it wasn't clear. Like something you didn't explain so-and-so, and you realize, okay, I did explain it, but it's not clear enough, I better fix it. There are other, but anything that you're rejecting from the reviewer, you better have a good reason. Because again, a good way to get bumped out of this whole process is to not take some of the reviewer's comments seriously or to do a superficial job. And all those details of the changes you made go into your revised paper with track changes. They also go into a response to reviewers in which you then lay out issue by issue all the changes, and you can quote. This is where the cut and paste helps. You can literally cut and paste. You can say, we changed the paragraph to address this issue, here's the new paragraph, and you can cut that same paragraph out of your manuscript and also put it in the cover letter. So there it is right in front of them. And that's extremely helpful, especially for the conditional acceptance, because in either case, it means the editor can read it without having to read, or even the reviewers can read it without having to read your whole paper again. Which is, there's a lot of wear and tear on reviewers, and you may hope that you're going to wear them down, that they'll just say, fine, publish it. I can't stand to read your paper another time, but that's not necessarily a favor to you. So better to get them focused in on the things you need them to look at and to see. Okay, I think I'm taking up most of my time here, and I do want to have some time for questions and comments. Let me just see if there's a couple more quick things to mention. So it's also possible that you get rejection. And even revise and submit. I have to say, the first paper I submitted, I got to revise and resubmit. I was so depressed that I put it in a drawer and didn't look at it for a year. That is not the correct response. That's a result of a lack of mentorship in my own career, because a revise and submit is fine. That's what most papers get, and you're on the way. That's the process. They've asked you to see it again. They've asked you, given you suggestions for how to improve it, and they're willing to see it again. So great. You have a good chance it's going to move down. It doesn't guarantee it. It might get rejected at the next stage, but you're definitely on the way. So don't give up. Even with the rejection, don't give up. It may be that the feedback tells you, oh yes, my gosh, it really is a mess. I better go fix that. But it may be that you say, actually, all this rejection shows me is this is not the right paper. Social science and medicine is not the right place for this paper. Or yeah, the reviewers really didn't get what I'm getting at. I better rethink where I'm sending it. Or I can make some minor changes and let me just send it out. So that's also why when you're picking journals at the beginning, it's good to pick multiple journals. Say, this is my #1 choice, but here's my B and my C choice. So that if it gets rejected right away from A, I don't waste any time, feeling bad for myself and questioning my career trajectory. I just go to plan B right away and I get it out right away. Another thing that I think will help you later on in your career is having more than one paper in peer review helps. It's like buying more than one lottery ticket. Your hope doesn't just, everything is not just riding on one event, and you've got things that are at different stages and they sort of buffer each other. You're waiting for one thing, but you're not waiting on bated breath. You're working on something else in the meantime, and so on. It's a much healthier way to approach this process than getting, everything, all your hopes bundled into one thing at a time. Okay. Your manuscript's accepted. There's usually a chance for some last-minute fixes before they're actually processing the article. Make sure you have all the things that are needed, signed consent for publication, all the other things. And then at some point, you're going to get back a copy edited version by a copy editor. We actually, in our journal, do scientific editing before the copy editing. So if we check it again for any methodological issues, things that we think need to be addressed before it goes to the copy editor. You'll get it back from the copy editor. Again, respond quickly to that with all the fixes. Make sure they haven't changed your meaning anywhere. That happens. And then you'll get galley proofs. So then your article's been typeset, and that's your last chance to fix major things that might have happened, which can be anything. It can be left out. I had an article in our own journal. I published an article in our journal where in the one line of the abstract got lost. There was a page break, and they literally lost a line of the abstract. And once an article is published with that kind of error, there's nothing you can do except publish in erratum. When an article is published, it's given a DOI number, it's published online even before it's published in print. That is now the article of record. And it's part, again, of the integrity of science that even if you discover a mistake later, you cannot change the text. The text has to stay what it is. So then you can publish an erratum, which is always slightly awkward. I think I've covered most of these issues. The rest of this is just resources. So I've got a bunch of different resources here. I'll put the slides up for you. There's an older version of this on our website. I'll put the new version up. I'll put the video up. These are just some of the books I mentioned and other sources that I think are useful. And some specific to qualitative research. We didn't talk much about that. It's the whole other set of issues. I talked just about the simple structural issues. The broader issues have to do with the fact that because you're writing in a longer form and in a form that tries to capture narrative structure, there's more demand on the quality of your writing. In database scientific writing, repeating the same word over and over again to describe something is favored because it's clear. When you're writing an essay, when you're writing literary work, you try to change up your vocabulary. If there's 6 different ways to say something, that's cool. It makes it more interesting for the reader. In scientific writing, even in qualitative scientific writing, you try not to do that because you're trying to anchor your argument in specific concepts. So if you decide, here's the name of the theme of what these people were talking about, you don't rename the theme just because it's getting boring to keep repeating the theme, because you're trying to develop that idea very clearly. You don't want people to get sort of lost by sacrificing the by using novel language. There's specific issues around quantitative results in terms of how to set up a table and what needs to be presented. These differ a little bit in different genres of writing, different, like epidemiology is a little bit different from psychology and so on. So you need to get to know what's the standard in your journal. And I got through all my slides and we have 5 minutes left in our official time. Thank you all so much, and hope to see you at subsequent meetings. Take care.